When a loving cat orders pizza via drones and reminisces about his past, from being abandoned as a kitten to finding a home with John Arbuckle, Garfield's journey is anything but ordinary. The story begins with Garfield ordering a pizza using delivery drones before addressing the viewers to tell them about his backstory, as we then saw a flashback. As a kitten, Garfield was left alone by his father, who goes by the name Vic, in an alley. Just then, Garfield then saw a restaurant nearby and summoned the courage to walk across the street to visit the Italian restaurant. As he did so, he then finds a young man, John Arbuckle, eating alone. John sees Garfield and immediately sneaks him in through the window while also offering the cat a pepperoni from his pizza. However, Garfield devours the entire pie in 2 seconds, making John very surprised by this act. He then proceeded to eat everything in sight around the restaurant during a birthday celebration. After a few moments later, John then sneaks him out in a box of lasagna. After the event, John then tries to leave Garfield, as he then told Garfield that he can't afford to own a pet in his apartment and promised to meet with him later. Just then, he realizes the little cat has nowhere to go, as he began crying. However, it was at this moment Garfield declares this is when he adopted John, laughing out loud and not the other way around. The scene then switches as we see as John moves into a bigger house to accommodate Garfield, and he later also adopts Odie the dog as his pet. It also explained to us, the viewer, that Odie was his favorite partner, as he was also a kind. Garfield enjoys swiping most of John's food with help from Odie, who acts as his lookout. Garfield says that life for them is sweet, except, of course, for Mondays, as he hates it, although things would soon come crashing down. In the middle of the night, Garfield and Odie wake up to go get some snack, meaning nearly half the fridge. As they did so, they are then visited by 2 dogs, Roland and Nolan, who then showed up in the kitchen and kidnapped the both of them. Meanwhile, Garfield and Odie wake up in an abandoned location where they were tied upside down for hours before a cloaked figure shows up to break them free. However, Garfield soon recognizes the figure as Vic, and he is not too happy to see his father over the belief that his father had abandoned him. Before Vic can get them out, they are found by Roland and Nolan's boss, who is a sinister Persian cat named Jinx. Jinx then went on to explain that she lured Vic there by kidnapping Garfield. However, in her backstory, she narrated to us that she wanted to be a famous cat, but then, when she went to perform for a talent show, she got stage fright and lost. Later, Jinx met Vic and used to be part of this crew of cats that would steal and fend for themselves. They stole milk from a farm, but Jinx was caught and sent to the pound, even though Vic tried to go after her. Although Roland and Nolan helped break Jinx out, and now she wants Vic to steal back a quart of milk for every day that she was locked up in jail, amounting to over 6,000 quarts of milk, or else she will have the dogs tear them apart. And for her to show she means business, she devours her henchbird that also helped abduct Garfield and Odie, with her also giving them 72 hours to get her milk. Garfield's dad told him to just relax, as this would just be a quick steal, more like grab and take. Despite Garfield not wanting anything to do with Vic, Roland and Nolan force him and Odie to help Vic pull off their heist. The next morning, John wakes up and began looking for Garfield and his pet dog. Just as he reaches the fridge, he noticed a lot of food on the floor. However, John is surprised by this, as Garfield never wastes any food. Just then he realized something was wrong. Meanwhile, Vic asks Garfield to jump onto a moving train by launching him from a tree, causing Garfield to ricochet across several things, including somehow a parade float of himself, before landing in a pile of manure inside the train. Meanwhile, John finds that Garfield and Odie have gone missing, and he ends up staying on hold for a whole day, as they are 1,375 individuals who also need help finding their pet. The scene switched as the trio arrive at Lactose Farms for the heist, while Roland and Nolan keep eyes on them. While trying to find a way to sneak inside, Garfield and Vic see Otto the bull, one half of the mascot duo for the dairy farm, alongside his beloved cow girlfriend Ethel. When Odie notices he looks sad upon seeing Ethel from a distance, Otto explains that he was separated from her because the company that bought the farm put him out to pasture. Vic then suggests that they can help reunite Otto with Ethel if he helps them get inside Lactose Farms for their heist. Just then, Otto lays out an elaborate plan for the trio to get inside, but Garfield isn't happy about his role, as he believed before he succeed he's already dead. However, Garfield and Vic's bickering causes them to keep messing up. It culminates in Otto tying them both up until they can work together to get themselves out. They keep using the vine around them to beat each other up until Garfield vents to Vic over being abandoned. Vic then tells Garfield the truth, narrating a story that happened on that night, as that day he went to go get Garfield food, but he had to wait until a restaurant employee would leave so Vic can grab food. But when he eventually got back, he saw Garfield in the restaurant with John and decided that John would provide more for him than Vic ever could. However, Vic states that he visited Garfield many times while sitting in an oak tree, watching him through the window of John's house. Meanwhile, after Garfield forgives Vic, Odie cuts them loose, and Otto decides that it would take 17 years for them to fully get ready, but since they have only less than 48 hours, he declares they are good now. Immediately, Roland and Nolan go back to Jinx to let her know that Garfield, Vic, and Odie are now very much ready for the heist. Jinx then makes a phone call to an animal control station, as it seems to be her plan all along, where a highly obsessive and dedicated officer, Marge Malone, is able to translate Jinx's mew into human speech, where she tells the officers that a heist is happening at Lactose Farms. Marge then wastes no time in heading out. The trio sneak into the farm inside children's backpacks before making their way through the air vents. They end up in a part of the factory called the Acorn, which Otto warned them to stay away from. Garfield ends up falling through the Acorn but lands on a giant block of butter. However, unfortunately for him, the cheese is getting processed. Odie tries to save Garfield, but Vic eventually saves both of them from getting sliced up. Meanwhile, just as they manage to find the truck with all the milk, Marge finds them first and holds the keys. The three attempt to outsmart Marge, but Vic ends up with the keys and gets away with the truck, leaving Garfield and Odie to be taken by Marge to the pound. Garfield is once again crushed. Outside, Otto tries to get to Ethel, but Marge's fellow officers chase him off with cattle prods. Vic brings the milk truck to Jinx, but she then reveals that the milk was never what she wanted, but rather to make Vic suffer and get sent to the pound as payback. Now that Garfield is there, Jinx decides she has other plans for him. At the pound, Garfield meets the other cats from Vic's crew, including Olivia and Snoot Cat. They are also mad at Vic, believing that he abandoned them. However, Garfield realizes that they are talking about Vic going off to visit him at John's house, where they state that he left a notch in the oak tree for every time he visited. Garfield thinks they were lied to just as John shows up to pick up Garfield and Odie, since the pound contacted him using Odie's tag, and Garfield didn't even realize he has a tag in the folds of his neck. Garfield is delighted to be back home and prepares to gorge himself on an epic lasagna feast, but he sees the oak tree in the backyard. He walks over and climbs up, where he finds that Vic really did leave hundreds of notches in the tree for every time he visited, and Garfield finally realizes that Vic really has always loved him. He then heads off with Odie to find Vic. Garfield and Odie return to Jinx's hideout, where they find her bored with her whole evil scheme, which reveals she is planning to throw Vic to his death from the train as it passes over a bridge. Meanwhile, the two contact Otto and promise to fulfill their end of the bargain to get Ethel back, but they ask for his help in saving Vic first. Otto catches up to the two and launches Garfield towards the train. With help from Odie, they summon a fleet of pizza drones to come in and help them against Roland and Nolan. Garfield rides flying pizza boxes and causes the dogs to injure themselves before he gets to Vic, while also informing us that he does his own stunt, and only him and Tom Cruise do such stunts. As they come upon the bridge, Garfield pushes Vic off since Otto set up the net for them to land on, but it's too tight and they both get bounced back into Roland and Nolan's grasps, while Jinx gets ready to watch them both die. Garfield and Vic reconcile after all they have been through, which touches Roland and Nolan so much that they then turn on Jinx. She then responded by pushing all four of them off the train, but as she laughs, she gets knocked over too. Otto saves Garfield, Vic, Roland, and Nolan, while Jinx gets caught in the net. Garfield then makes good on his promise by organizing a trade with Marge. She gives them Ethel in exchange for a caged Jinx, who Marge knows is responsible for the heist. Otto and Ethel have a romantic reunion. Garfield, Vic, and Odie go back to John's house, and Vic says goodbye to them. Garfield and Odie go back inside, but after taking some time to think about it, Garfield runs outside to find Vic in the oak tree and invites him to stay for dinner. The two then hug for the first time. Inside, John is not happy to find a bill for all the pizza drones Garfield used. Later on, Vic keeps coming over for dinner until John eventually fully adopts him, while all of John's friends and neighbors, and some of Garfield's neighborhood cat friends, show up for Garfield's birthday party. The movie ends as John hangs up a portrait of himself and his pets as one happy family. After the credits, we then get a classic Garfield comic strip appears with him asking if people are still watching because they are waiting for a sequel.